Geralt's first stop on his mission to track down Ciri is Velen, also known as No Man's Land, and formerly known as Temeria, that stands in the middle of two armies, Nilfgaard, led by Emperor Emhyr, and Redania, led by King Radovid, a familiar face from the previous games, who is representing the north because every other king is either dead or got their shit kicked in by Radovid. And as a result of being the playground for war, Velen is left flooded with blood and bodies, and monstrosities feeding on them. As if living in a place that looks like the aftermath of a music festival isn't enough, Velen is inhabited by ancient evils that you better worship and make sacrifices to, or else you're not getting a bountiful harvest. No, actually, who am I kidding? They're not growing shit in Velen that isn't contempt or suffering. No, actually, you're probably just going to get mauled by a big scary monster, which was probably going to happen whether you made a sacrifice or not, because Velen is literally a spawn point for every creature you've read about in European fairy tales and folklore, which would be terrible if it wasn't for the fact that there is work for a witcher in every village and then some. You don't even need to make a LinkedIn account. You just show up and take the job and then make the peasants pay you your desired salary, because what are they gonna do, call human resources? This is Velen. There is neither humanity or resources. Because if the monsters and war crimes that actually aren't war crimes, because can you tell me where Geneva is on this map, weren't enough? There's literal cannibal gangs attacking people on the road and eating them. Velen is an incredibly wet region that, besides battlefields soaked in blood, is made up of swamps, bogs, and puddles from every woman within 30 feet of Geralt apparently. There's mountains from which you can get a clear view of your neighbor being dragged into the woods by creatures that you can't even begin to comprehend. And in those woods there's a tree that might actually just kill you if you don't do what it wants you to do. And just a bit further from there you'll find an island with a haunted tower on it filled with rats. Because of course there is. It's fucking Velen. And this is just barely scratching the surface. Velen is essentially an open world Brothers Grimm adaptation, sprinkled with some of the Witcher's dark humor. It's dark without being edgy, something the other games sometimes struggle with, but still beautiful. Walking through the swamps as the sun is setting is something else. The reflections in the water, the trees moving in the wind, and the warm orange from the sun makes an otherwise grim and grey place look like an expressionistic painting. It's been over 9 years and I still can't get enough of how perfect it looks. Although Velen is a quote-unquote ugly region, where everything is swamps, run-down villages and ruins, no place looks or feels the same. You always have an idea of where on the map you are without looking at it. The map is filled with unique landmarks, and there are subtle differences in nature from each location. And it's a region that sounds like generic dark fantasy, but is actually really well thought out and very much its own. Velen is definitely The Witcher 3 at its darkest, and I want to use one of my favorite side quests from Velen as an example. A man's wife is missing, and he has hired Geralt to track her down. Geralt gathers information from the others in the village, and enters the local woods. As he is getting closer to the truth, the man's sister-in-law intercepts him, urging him to stop the search, and offers to pay him more if he goes back and tells her brother-in-law that his wife is dead, and that he should move on. The player has the option to accept the payment, or to move on with the search. I moved on with the search, which leads to a hut, and underneath it is a cave that turns out to be a werewolf's lair. And the werewolf is the man who hired you. He killed his own wife when he was turned, but doesn't remember doing so. Geralt fights the werewolf, but before he can deliver the finishing blow, the sister-in-law appears and stops him, and spills her guts. Not literally, but it can happen if you let it. She wanted her sister's husband for herself, and knew about his curse, and led her sister into the woods in order to show her his true form and scare her off. But it went wrong and the sister was killed in the process. Upon hearing the truth, the husband wants to kill her, and here the player is presented with two choices: defend her and kill the werewolf, or let him have his way and then be asked to mercy kill him afterwards. It's a scenario where no matter what you do, you're going to walk away from it feeling dirty and unsatisfied, and that's the general feeling of playing through Velen. There are several vantage points scattered around where you can take in the entire map, and nearly everything you see you can go to, including the distant flaming towers of Novigrad, the Pearl of the North, and the largest city in the Northern Realms. A trading hub of art and culture, and the seat of the Hierarch of the Eternal Fire, linked to the Order of the Flaming Rose. Once you get past the Redanian military blockade, you enter an entirely different world than the one you left behind, and it's gorgeous. You're met with a countryside right out of a romantic poem. Beautiful painted houses based on ones found in real-life Poland. And then you see the city walls. And for once, you feel at ease. And then you enter the slums through the main gate. Still better than Vizima though. Luckily it doesn't take long to get to the main square, where Geralt is just in time to see a Doppler, a creature that can take on any identity it wishes, be burned at the stake. Novigrad is known for its diversity, but not if the eternal fire and Radovid has anything to say about this wokeness. If you ignore the charred corpses, the main square is breathtaking, and contains magnificent architecture of different styles. And from here, you can go down to the docks, and start missing your ex because of the smell, and take a look at a really cool crane which you can also find in Gdansk, Poland, which I think is neat. If you take a different route from the main square, you will walk upwards towards the richest and finest areas of Novigrad, towards Temple Isle, that you reach by crossing this giant bridge that is also a residential area, and which has an amazing view over the slums, surrounding forests and fields outside the city, and the sea. Novigrad is a port city after all. Temple Isle and the temple is visible from anywhere in Velen. And while it's very beautiful, there isn't really that much to do here besides take in the beautiful views of religious extremism. And it could be because of COD content. Novigrad is so big and detailed, and every nook and cranny has its own charm that makes it stand out from the rest. And it's such a breath of fresh air from Velen. The city explores a lot of The Witcher's more light-hearted and humorous nature. While Velen was good at cracking jokes and having fun, it has a much darker humor compared to Novigrad and its outskirts. One main quest in the city has Geralt rummage through a haunted house for an Oniromancer that can help him locate Ciri through his dreams. She's been hired by the owner of the house, a wealthy banker, to figure out what's haunting it. Geralt finds her in a trance of sorts, likely because of whatever is haunting the house, that Geralt finds out is a godling. A creature that looks and acts like a human child, but slightly different, who has made the house seem haunted so humans would stay away so she could live there rent-free. Geralt can force her to leave, or plea a deal with her. Leave the Oniromancer alone, and in exchange, Geralt will tell the banker that the curse that haunts the house can't be lifted, so the godling can continue being a NEET there. And if you return to the house later on, the godling and Oniromancer will have formed a sort of daughter and mother relationship, and in a way they resemble Geralt's and Ciri's relationship. Two individuals from different worlds brought together by destiny. Novigrad is home to many tales like this, comical and magical. And the city is home to many intelligent monsters like godlings, who often seek refuge in the cities despite it being the home base of the Eternal Fire in the case of Novigrad, and their endless crusades against anything non-human or magical. They manage to hide in plain sight or in the many buildings that make up the maze at Novigrad. If you try and explore the sewers, you might stumble into a sleeping vampire's lair, and if you run around the slums, you might find an oddity or two, but you will most certainly get mugged by one of the many gangs of Novigrad. But mainly the Joker gang. Their real name is worse, believe me, because they're named after the boss. And getting attacked by gangs with ridiculous names in the shittiest part of a city brings back many memories of The Witcher 1. Novigrad isn't the only quote-unquote civilized place you can visit in Velen. Southeast of Novigrad you have Oxenfurt, home to the prestigious Oxenfurt University that you have heard so many mentions of in the books and previous games, and it's closed down by the Redanian army. I believe this was another piece of cut content, which really hurts Oxenfurt in the game, because it's just so small. Sure, it looks nice and there's some fun side quests, and a couple of main quests take place in the town as well, but it just lacks the charm and personality that Novigrad, Vizima, Flotsam, or even a lot of the villages in Velen have, and it's essentially a smaller, lesser version of Novigrad. The town's entire identity is built around the university, and while you can see it and walk around in its courtyard, you can't enter it, and it plays no role in the story, besides one part in one of the expansion packs. Oxenfurt is so insignificant compared to Novigrad that the entire area north of the military blockade is simply referred to as Novigrad by players. Velen, Novigrad. The entire map is so vast and has so many sites to see, quests to dive into, secrets to uncover, and terrain to cover, that it's mind-boggling to think that there is an entire other map, equal in size and detail, if not a little more so, that offers an entirely different taste of the Witcher universe. And that is...
Skellige?
Skellige.
And you can go there before you even begin any of the main quests in Velen or Novigrad, as long as you have enough money to pay an alcoholic captain to take you there, so you can safely drift ashore after your ship is attacked by pirates. You can go to Skellige anytime you want, but I recommend completing all the Velen and Novigrad main quests and side quests that are offered at that point of the game, so that when you finally get to Skellige, you're able to appreciate it more and not be distracted. And it also makes managing quests more manageable, because it can be a bit overwhelming with the amount of things in the game vying for your attention at all times. So having quests on two sides of the continent isn't helping. The reason Geralt goes to Skellige is because Yennefer has a lead regarding Ciri, and because Ciri spent some of her childhood there. Skellige is inspired by Scandinavian and Celtic folklore and ancient history, and it mixes them together very well actually. The art department really put a lot of care into not making Skellige another typical Viking fantasy location, but actually unique and distinct and putting a new spin on it. Skellige is made up of several islands, and each one has its own flavor. They are each controlled by their own clan, and every clan has their own look. And it's not just coat of arms, it's completely different sets of armors and colors. And many other companies with a game the size of The Witcher 3 would simply have opted to just copy-paste the same guard models around the map and then change the texture on their shields. But not CD Projekt Red. The biggest of the islands and the one you'll spend the most time on is Ardskellig. And it's so beautiful you want to cry. But that's the case with all of Skellige. No, actually, Velen and Novigrad are beautiful. Skellige is gorgeous and peaceful, mainly because it's so far away from the war, but I also noticed there aren't any elves on any of the islands, which is a fun detail I wanted to share for no particular reason. And every elven ruin has been turned into dungeons you can loot or places of worship for the local religion that you can be respectful at. Unlike those fucking Daggerir, there are 3 professions in Skellige: farmer, fisherman, and murderer. But a lot of people combine professions. You could be a murdering fisherman or farmer, but you can't be a fisherman farmer. That's stretching it a bit. Skellige has a very strong sense of honor and they value their ancient customs very highly. And there's a lot of them, so many that I can only remember one. If you break any of the unwritten customs, you either have to kill yourself or just be killed by someone else. Straight up. Sometimes there's a third option, and that's fate worse than death. I just remember the second custom. Don't criticize the customs. This is deeply cultural, and you need to respect it, or you can go kill yourself. Bitch. Clearly these people, if you can even call them that, with their barbaric culture and constant raiding of the northern kingdoms, don't know the first thing about civility. Unlike us landlubbers. Because we have a university that's currently closed down because the king is waging a war. Not just on the invading enemy, but also non-humans and mages. And also herbalists for some reason. But elves are among the persecuted, so I kinda don't care because fuck them. On the continent, the king is elected by birthright, while on the Skellige Islands, the king is elected by the Jarls. And as we all know, democracy is a failed system that will never work. And if you want anything done, you need to let the inbred warmonger take charge. Because that's what the gods decided. But it's not entirely bad. There's a collection of quests where Geralt gets to interfere with the election, and that's beautiful. Every island has their own Jarl, and Ardskellig has 2 because it's so big. In Northern Ardskellig you have Crach-an-Craite.
Look, it's Crach.
Wait, Wolf!
Damned crystal!
Who is a familiar figure from the books, and helped take care of Ciri when she was young. But that's not the only thing he has in common with Geralt. They both hit that. In the southern part of Ardskellig you have Lugos Stromond. He's bald. On the island of Spigorok they have Jarl Ulrik, who on the mainland we call schizophrenic. But on the islands they say that the gods are talking to him. Hey Ulrik, fuck you. There's also other Jarls, but I don't care about them. Their islands are beautiful though. You got Faroe, Hinterfjall, Ardskellig, and then there's Undvik, which despite being the second biggest island, is nearly completely deserted because of an ice giant that decided to squat there and throw out the residents. It's extremely eerie and fascinating to explore. It's the most peaceful of the islands. It's very quiet. But in The Witcher, silence is just something waiting to be broken with a scream or howl in the distance. It's creepy and the opposite of the rest of Skellige. Skellige has just as many monsters as Velen, and has gangs of bandits waiting to attack anyone in their path as well. But in Skellige, because of the culture and attitude, it seems as ordinary as a farmer plowing his fields on the mainland, or a deer running through the forest. It feels natural and harmonious. And Skellige therefore has this extremely peaceful feeling to it. Riding through the forests, mountains, fields, coasts and small towns. Everything feels like it's how it's supposed to be, even if it's extremely violent. While Velen and Novigrad feel like fairy tales, Skellige feels like an epic or a saga. An example of this is a quest where Geralt has to retrieve Crach-an-Crait's son, Hjalmar, from Undvik, where he has taken it upon himself and his men to kill the ice giant that has taken over the island. But neither he or his crew has returned, so Geralt must explore the island for clues, and eventually face the giant alongside Hjalmar. And depending on how it goes, Geralt can get a new nickname around Skellige as the Giant Slayer. There are new ways to explore the world, besides Geralt's patented light jog and cool slow walk. You can also ride Geralt's trusted companion Roach, that has been sorely missed in the previous 2 entries, and who makes exploring these huge vast maps that much more epic. And the horse riding actually feels pretty smooth, until you have to cross a bridge and Roach hits the invisible barrier. But when you get Nihi into full gallop through awe-inspiring landscapes, that's where it's at. Exploring by boat is an option now, too. And while it won't be your main mode of transportation, it's actually viable, and an extremely peaceful and different way of taking in the world, especially Skellige. And if that wasn't enough, there's even a snowboarding mechanic now, which becomes a game of finding the perfect hill or mountain where you can snowboard uninterrupted all the way down. It can actually be a viable way to get down a hill or a mountain, but for the most part it's just extremely silly. The nature of The Witcher is perfect for open world gameplay, and it only serves the plot and the lore of the universe. And I love that you get the best of both the short stories through the various side quests, and the saga through the main quests. And being a Witcher, it makes sense for Geralt to roam from village to village looking for work, because, well, he's a Witcher and there's a lot of monsters around. And it's perfect motivation for the player to explore the entire map. Skellige and Velen/Novigrad are the 2 main maps of The Witcher 3, and besides them you also have several smaller maps and areas you can travel to, like Kaer Morhen, which is the same as it was in The Witcher 1, but now even more beautiful. And the entire surrounding area is open to you like it was in The Witcher 1 side story, The Price of Neutrality. And the map is filled with references and callbacks to the first game. One of my favorites is that you can find Leo's grave and pay your respects. And the royal palace in Vizima is the same as it was in the first game too, just with some new decorating inside, and where you can also find Witcher 1 related secrets. Somehow, despite being so much bigger than both the previous games combined, The Witcher 3 manages to also have so much more detail. A lot of open world games, there is a lot of copy pasting and auto-generated locations and quests, but nothing in The Witcher 3 is random. Every location is unique and they all make sense. Just like The Witcher 3's new combat system. Witcher 1 was a rhythm slasher, Witcher 2 was Sisyphean with all the rolling, and The Witcher 3 feels just right. Essentially, the third took the second's good-natured but stiff combat and made it more dynamic, fast-paced, responsive, fair and fun. But the biggest addition is adding a sidestep/dodge alongside the roll. New players will automatically gravitate towards the roll because it's the safest option, but you'll soon learn that just like in striking combat sports, the key is to create as little distance between you and the strike you're evading, so you're in position to counter immediately, instead of rolling away and then wasting precious time running at your opponent, giving them time to defend or counter your attack. And the more comfortable you get with it, the more daring you can get. There are times where you will have to roll away from attacks, but most of the time you don't need to, and while it can be frustrating if you're new to the game, especially on the higher difficulty levels, it is key to efficient offense and rewarding gameplay. Movement in combat is responsive and flows, and this is very apparent when you're fighting groups of enemies. The first game gave you different combat styles, with one meant for groups, and while there is skill involved, it isn't terribly exciting besides the satisfying sound design. But it wasn't frustrating, unlike The Witcher 2, which was awkward and clunky with a terrible hit scan and movement against hordes of enemies in tight spaces. In the third game, Geralt almost dances from enemy to enemy like he is described as fighting in the books, with incredibly smooth animation. And it's based on timing and skill, and there isn't anything from the game holding you back besides yourself. And once you get a feel for the mechanics, you'll enter a flow state every time you enter combat where it all feels like second nature. And you can finally truly feel like a Witcher that makes bands of bandits look silly, sidestepping and countering all their attacks. Despite the great combat movement, Geralt still walks like a Lithuanian trying to smuggle Polish goods across the border, not realizing what he's hauling isn't even illegal. He just hid canned goods in his inventory for no reason. Geralt has a crossbow this time around, and there are a lot of flying enemies like griffins, where it really comes in useful. And you can get a lot of special bolts for it. But unless I'm fighting a monster that flies, I barely use it, unless I need to chip off an enemy who is running low on health. Geralt is still a crowned store magician, and will cast a vast array of spells, but let's be honest, you're only going to be spamming Igni and Quen. The rest are just there for funsies. But where combat really gets interesting is with Geralt's potion abuse. There were a lot of different potions in the previous games, but bro, what the fuck? When am I going to use this? Despite being genetically modified to be able to abuse more potions, Geralt can only drink so many before he starts seeing shit. There's certainly a supply, but I'm just not sure about the demand with a lot of them.
Satisfied. Enough.
Then there's a lot of sword oils, and they all have a little critter somewhere that can't handle them. And I'm so glad that the next gen update made it so the right oil is automatically applied to your sword when you're fighting enemies. And that it also automatically applies another coat when you run out of charges, instead of going into your inventory and applying it manually numerous times during combat. And if there was a smarter way to do this before the next gen update, besides mods, I don't want to hear it, because then I might actually go through with it this time. You and Geralt will fight a lot of humans and non-humans, and I mean a lot. It's actually crazy the amount of people Geralt has killed, and that he still insists on his so-called Witcher neutrality. Like Geralt, how is murdering 10 times the population of Novigrad in the first 10 hours of a 100-hour game neutral? Oh, what's that? It was self-defense? Well, you did what you had to do then, I guess. But who cares that little Ivan is going to grow up without a father? You can make orphans in so many other games. Show us the creatures. What the fuck? If it wasn't for the endless amount of abominations in the world, Geralt would be a janitor at Oxford University. That is, if it was fucking open. Thankfully, the horrors are endless, so he can still ride from village to village and take all the money they have so half of the villagers can starve during the winter. But hey, the griffin is dead, isn't it? The bestiary is so expansive in the third game, and there's a lot of familiar faces from previous entries in the franchise, and with a lot of newcomers, each presenting the player with a different challenge. This is a really long game, but every monster contract is exciting, not only because of the excellent stories and presentation attached to each of them, but especially because of the monster you will face at the end of them, that has been built up the entire quest with exposition, stories from victims and the area, and you the player scavenging for clues and ingredients for the potions and sword oils you need to fight them. And then when you're finally ready, you wait, and the beast appears, and depending on your prior knowledge and preparation, you'll first feel your opponent out and get a read on them and their timing, and after that, the fight truly begins. It's not only during Witcher contracts that you'll encounter monsters, you can also easily stumble upon them in the wild. They all have their own respective habitats and habits, and you can choose to merely admire them from afar, or you can simply attack them for no reason. You don't need a contract to hunt endangered species. Now, what would monsters say about this? Probably rescue the monster and kill it via lethal injection an hour later. Monster designs go from beautiful and awe-inspiring to looking like something that hunt you down a dirt road somewhere in rural Washington. The most common monsters you run into are necrophages, that being drowners, ghouls, grave hags, etc., that tend to roam around swamps, cemeteries and battlefields. So basically all of Velen. And then there's also other groups of monsters like insectoids that you'll most often run into in the forests. Both of these groups tend to fight in high numbers and aim to overwhelm you, which is where you need to learn how to crowd control using sidesteps and rolls. Then there's monsters like werewolves, vampires, fiends and legions that don't need high numbers to fuck you up. There are so many creatures in this game and they all manage to be unique and memorable in terms of their gameplay and their design. Vampires alone have so many interesting designs and they can be some of the hardest to fight and will catch you off guard and are greatly expanded upon in the Blood and Wine expansion pack. Legions are simply beautiful and there's something really graceful about the way they fight. Fiends are pretty straightforward in combat, but watch out. And werewolves remind me of bad fan art on DeviantArt. And this isn't mentioning all the sentient and intelligent monsters who know right from wrong, like Dopplers and vampires. What the fuck is your problem?
I sense your blood. Come out and fight, bitch.
Witcher contracts are basically optional boss fights, but they are nothing compared to the campaign's actual boss fights. Imagine this, you're minding your own business discussing European genetics with your friends, until you hear the distant sound of throat singing and antidepressants, and then you're locked in combat with a meth fiend. The Witcher 3 Wild Hunt truly lives up to its name. It's the game in the trilogy where you feel the most like a Witcher, and the Wild Hunt are at the core of the game's story, and their boss fights are unbelievably hard and fun. There's a lot of fighting in this game, and in order to get through it all, you need to make Geralt into the man you want him to be. As in the other games, there's many different builds you can go for. For example, you can have a magic based one, a sword fighting one, or a potion based one. And you can gain many different abilities and skills throughout your playthrough. There's plenty of new weapons and armor, some better looking than others. The best looking sets of armor and weapons being Witcher gear, one set for each school, that are scattered throughout the world, and when you craft and fully upgrade every piece of a respective Witcher gear set, you not only gain a boost in your confidence, but a significant one in your abilities. And every Witcher set offers their own advantages, so it can be a good idea to read up on them to know which ones you want to look for. I went for the Cat School gear, which is based on high movement, defense, and fast attacks, and looking fly as fuck. Despite all the Witcher gear being works of art, I can't say the same for the regular gear. Swords either look fine or downright beautiful. I don't have any problem with them, but the armor, some of it looks so ass. And it's a straight downgrade from the second game where every piece of armor was so beautiful. And it only went from good looking to better looking. Meanwhile in The Witcher 3, over half of them looks like something you stripped off a corpse. Which frankly, to be fair, you did in most cases. But even a lot of the armor besides the Witcher gear that you can get crafted at a blacksmith don't look any better. I like the standard armor you can find in Skellige, and the armor you start out with in White Orchard, but even that is severely lacking in comparison to the most basic armor in Assassins of Kings. In fact, this still pisses me off 9 years later, and so much so that I'm going to end the video here. See y'all in part 3.